Welcome back, everyday Americans, to rejoin the Constitution study. And as promised, I have from the fire Bob Corn Reeves, and he's
Revere.
Revere. Sorry, I'm sorry about that.
You want
We're
to
going to
start
talk
over?
about the Trump's executive order regarding flag burning. So, Bob, sorry for the misspeak, but thank you for your time and joining us here. And tell us, my audience, a little bit about yourself.
Happy to be here. Thank you. I am a First Amendment lawyer. I have been a First Amendment litigator for over 4 decades. Most of that time was in private practice. And then I started doing work with FIRE as an organization. FIRE is the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. And about a little over 2 years ago, I joined FIRE as chief counsel. And so I work on a range of First Amendment issues in that capacity.
So we got the big guns, we got the chief counsel. Now, there is a question I ask every attorney I talk to. When you were in law school, did you study the Constitution or constitutional law?
I studied constitutional law, and I've always thought since going to law school that the first thing that students should do in any constitutional law course is to be given a booklet with the Constitution, the instructions for our country, because it really is co quite compact, and it
Yes.
would do everyone a lot of good to read that before they start reading cases.
And it's the supreme law of the land. You would think that they would teach it in law school. It's kind of this informal little poll I've done for almost a decade now. And I've had exactly one person tell me they studied the Constitutional Law School. So, based on that, our need to understand the Constitution, let's talk a little bit about the Donald Trump's executive order regarding flag burning. Now, as we were getting set up and prepped, we talked about this a bit, but is there really any teeth to what he's talking about doing?
No, you know,
Sweet and simple point.
it's a pronouncement of what Donald Trump would like to see happen. But just as King Canute couldn't hold back the tides, uh, Donald Trump can't make the Constitution disappear with the wave of his hand. And so the law in this area is really well established. At the time of the signing of this executive order, the president said a very sad Supreme Court and a 5-4 decision um, upheld flag burning as a form of symbolic protest. But it's really hard to put it that way because when you realize that one of the most conservative justices in our history, Antonin Scalia, voted in the majority and made clear that he believed that as much as it is upsetting and how much he hates flag burning, it is a bedrock principle of American law and American constitutional law that the government doesn't get to prohibit symbolic acts just because it doesn't like what people have to say.
It's the very basis of the idea of freedom of speech, that
That's right.
speech that everybody agrees with doesn't need any protection. It's the
That's
speech
right.
we find offensive that we need to protect. And like I said, I don't like to hear it, but it teaches me a lot about the person saying it, which is why I find it so important. So we were also talking about the fact that even if with Donald Trump's executive order were to try to do something, he can't make law. He was
That's
talking
right.
about you're going to spend 10 years in jail. You burn the flag, spend 10 years. No, the
Right.
president doesn't have that authority. Only Congress can make law.
Exactly. That is the first part of the confusion of this executive order. And that is, or at least not so much the executive order, because it's different from what you heard when the president announced what was happening. His description of it was really quite different from what the executive order tries to do itself. But the error in what he was announcing was, you're exactly right. The president does not make laws. Congress makes laws. And by the way, after the Supreme Court ruled in Texas versus Johnson that flag burning or desecration of the flag as a form of protest is protected by the Constitution, Congress very quickly adopted what was called the Flag Protection Act. And it attempted to achieve the same purpose, protect the flag, but not with a content-based purpose, not with an effort to suppress a particular point of view. And the way Congress described it was simply to say, we are protecting the physical integrity of the flag and nothing else. and based on that, it thought that it could pass constitutional muster. Went back to the Supreme Court, and in United States versus Eichmann, the court again said no. The only reason you're protecting the flag is because of its symbolic value. It is inherently raising First Amendment issues. And so that's very similar to what the president is announcing with this executive order, trying to achieve the same objective and to claim that it's based on a content neutral purpose. We're just preventing fires or we're just preventing riots or whatever. Um, but that's not the way this works. And as a matter of fact, if you read the executive order, it says we're doing this because this kind of expression is so deeply offensive. Well, it is. But the whole point of the First Amendment is that it protects even deeply offensive speech.
Because sometimes deeply offensive speech is important. It, what many of us may find offensive may actually have a kernel of truth that's extremely important. Or if
Well, that's
nothing else, like I said, it tells me about the speaker whether or not I can trust what they're saying.
exactly. And also, people assume that it is a one-way message. Someone says something offensive, and someone listening to it may adopt that offensive point of view. But as often as not, what happens is someone will say something completely stupid or offensive or ridiculous, and those listening to it will say, well, that's stupid. And it reinforces to them what they believe is true.
What's the old saying? Better to keep your mouth shut and be thought a fool than to open your mouth and prove it.
Rolled out. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Now, and here's the other thing I always found interesting because if my memory is correct, under the flag code in the US code, the only proper way to dispose of a flag that's no longer going to be used is to burn it.
That's right.
So
That's
this whole
exactly
idea
right.
of flag burning is like, well, wait a second, are you telling me that's the only way I can dispose it? What Trump was focusing on was desecration, is making it look bad.
That's right. Local chapters of the American Legion and VFW regularly collect soiled or worn flags
Mhm.
and respectfully burn them. And the irony here is that the only difference between someone who is worthy of praise in destroying a flag that way and someone who the president wants to prosecute is the thought in their mind. If they're being insufficiently respectful,
Mhm.
then that makes it a crime. And that is deeply un-American.
Exactly. It actually is antithetical to what the flag is supposed to stand for. The
Exactly.
the the
It is making the
Constitution.
symbol more important than the actuality of freedom.
Yes, yes. So I'm not completely out of my mind when I'm looking at these things and saying, and I've talked about this before in the program, how yeah, it's a violation of this freedom of symbolic speech, of freedom of expression, as I like to, because you got speech and press and even religion, the ability to free expression.
Right.
It's all about expression,
Exactly.
and the idea of it's just another form of censorship. And everybody that was screaming about censorship under Biden, how many of them are cheering censorship under Trump because it's censorship of something they find offensive?
Well, that's right. And that's one of the reasons why FIRE exists. We try and maintain that principle regardless of who is in power. We filed briefs against the Biden administration when it was going too far, and now we're doing work when this administration goes too far as well. The politics of it, to me, doesn't matter. It is the principle and whether or not the government should have that kind of power. And the only way to assess whether or not that kind of power is something that you're comfortable with is to ask yourself this question. How would you feel about giving the government this kind of power over speech if the person pulling the lever was your worst enemy, the person who you thought was the most reviled political figure? And it doesn't matter what your answer is. The bottom line should be, I don't want the government to have that kind of power.
Here, my opinion is when it comes to political parties, a pox on all their houses. Um, you know,
Yeah,
I, I've seen them cause so many of our problems here, but it's the idea of I refuse to support parties. I refuse to support individuals. I only support policies that I can support constitutionally.
yeah.
And so when Trump does something that I said is constitutionally sound, legally sound, I support him. When he does something that's blatantly unconstitutional, I can't support him. And I think that attitude, we've turned politics into a team sport. Donkeys
That's
and
right.
elephants are more important than anything else.
That's right. We've become so polarized that we can't see what the actual issues are. And to me, I'm a non-political person. To me, anything that politics touches, it tends to diminish or destroy. And so I try and deal with these issues by focusing on what I understand to be the underlying constitutional principles.
You could almost say politics corrupts and party politics corrupts absolutely.
That sounds very familiar.
So you actually wrote a paper about the idea of a constitutional amendment. Could Congress, could they propose, could a convention propose an amendment to the Constitution to prohibit the desecration of the flag? And if it were to be adopted by the states, would that be a good thing, or uh, would it be a good thing, or would it be a constitutional thing? And those are not necessarily mutually exclusive.
Right. Well, this was a report that I did 20 years ago. I was commissioned by the Freedom Forum to ask the question in a neutral way, what would happen if Congress adopts this constitutional amendment, giving the government the power to adopt a law prohibiting the physical desecration or physical destruction of the flag. And we were very close to that happening. For almost 2 decades, there had been an active campaign to try and adopt an amendment to the First Amendment, the first such amendment that would have been adopted in our history, by the way. Um, and it came within one vote of being adopted. But anyway, I did this report to just try and figure out what would happen. And one would be there would be years of litigation because first you have to define what is a flag. I mean, there are
Mhm.
all kinds of flag resembling objects. What if you burn something like a handkerchief that isn't a flag under the US flag code, but you're still sending the same symbolic message? The First Amendment doesn't go away. All you're now trying to do is interpret what this law means.
Mhm.
What was that flag? And many other variations on that question. There would be a lot of technical issues to decide. It would be decided case by case. We'd go through years of litigation. And the one thing that we know that would happen is that there would be waves of flag burnings in protest. As a matter of fact, we saw that happen after the Supreme Court upheld the First Amendment protection for flag burning as a form of protest when Congress adopted what it called the Flag Protection Act. That act was passed and then it went to the Supreme Court and was struck down a year later. But in that 1 year period, according to a professor, Robert J. Goldstein, who studied this, is that there were more instances of flag burning in that 1 year than there had been in the 200 years of our country before that time.
Wow.
Flag burning, even though it gets a lot of notoriety and people talk about it, gets people riled up for obvious reasons, has been a rather rare phenomenon in this country, which makes you raise the question of, do you really want to amend the First Amendment for something that rare? But what we know would happen is when measures like this get proposed, and get adopted in the case of the Flag Protection Act, then it tends to promote the very act that it tries to prevent. And that's already happening with President Trump's executive order. We've already had a couple of high profile incidents of people being arrested for burning the flag in protest to the executive order.
It's like it's the Barbara Streisand effect. You
It
bring
is.
attention to something and you end up getting, you want to get rid of it, but you actually bring more of it.
That's
So,
right.
is there any other thing we haven't talked about this executive order and flag bring that you want to bring to the attention of my audience?
Well, we may have touched on this, but I think it bears noting how internally contradictory the executive order is. What it suggests is that prosecutions should be brought either at the local level or at behest of the Department of Justice um, to to prosecute people for doing things that are already against the law, right? There may be a law against disturbing the peace. There may be a law against open fires in a particular public place. And the fact is, you can enforce those laws without violating the First Amendment because they're neutral laws. And that the Supreme Court even said that in Texas versus Johnson. You can't steal a flag and burn it. Stealing the flag is is against the law. But what this executive order says is that we're going to bring these prosecutions in a constitutional way against these content neutral for these content under these content neutral laws, and we're going to do it because flag burning is so offensive. Well, you've introduced the very reason why it is protected under the First Amendment. If it's a message you dislike and the government is trying to restrict that message, that's the reason the First Amendment protects it.
Yeah, we live in a crazy world. There's nothing new about that. It's almost sounds like this is more of a sentencing enhancement, like a hate speech add on. You did this crime, we're going to add on this flag desecration to it. But
Well,
it
that's
doesn't
right.
really solve that problem.
And here, instead of trying to promote some goal toward anti-discrimination, and people debate that endlessly too, but here it is expressly and the executive order is almost like a signed confession that this is being done for an unconstitutional purpose.
It's viewpoint discrimination.
Exactly.
Bob, thank you so much for your time. I hope my audience got a better idea of what's going on with this. Before we go, though, tell us where they can find out more, where they can learn more about you and more about fire.
Well, we welcome anyone to come visit us at our website. It is www.thefire.org. We are the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan uh, um, civil rights organization that exists to promote not just the law of free expression, but a culture of free expression where people want to engage in civil discourse and want to respect each other's rights to express themselves.
Well, I know I've had several of your attorneys on. You're doing some really great work. Please check out thefire.org. Bob, thank you for your time, and hopefully we'll have you back for discussing other interesting First Amendment issues.
Thanks, Paul. I look forward to it.
Boom. And